Oxfam's annual report reveals that the hidden engine of world economy is driven by the unpaid care of work of women and girls. Now, the international charity, which focuses on poverty alleviation, shows that just over 2,000 individual billionaires control more money than 60% of the world's poor population combined, and that it is the underpaid or even unpaid work done by the world's poorest women that generates enormous wealth for the global economy. The report also highlights the fact that underpaid and unpaid work by women and girls adds 3 times more to the global economy each year than the whole technology industry together. Joining me from Abuja studio to discuss earlier intro there, this is lead Even It Up campaign from Oxfam International, Henry Ushie. I'm also joined by Gender Coordinator, Oxfam International, Susan Agada, who will be talking to us later as well. It's good to have you. I'm going to start with you, Henry. What do you make of this report? What are the long-term implications, as it were?
Yeah, so basically the Even It Up campaign, which is the fight against inequality around the world and specifically in Nigeria, focuses on reducing poverty within our climate, within our environment, around the world. And basically for Oxfam, for us, inequality is that chief driver of poverty. And to nip poverty in the bud, we actually need to reduce inequality to its barest minimum. Particularly with women, they are the most affected when it comes to the impact of poverty, which is basically caused by inequality. So if we are able to actually nip inequality in the bud, we can actually say that we are able to reduce poverty to its barest minimum. And this report has come to be able to support policymakers and also be able to support civil society to continue to campaign against poverty and against inequality within our environment in all its dimensions, whether it's elite capture, whether it's gender inequality or any form of socio-political imbalance within our system. This report has come to support the civil society and also policyholders to see what policy areas they can actually look into and then be able to address those areas or those issues that affect people's livelihoods and poverty in general.
Very good, Henry. But this issue has been long in making, even before this Oxfam report came out. Why do you think this is so? It seems to be there's a lukewarm attitude towards, sensitivity towards such issues. What do you make of it?
Well, basically, inequality, people say inequality will always remain, it will always exist. But eventually, we have come to realize that if we don't talk about it, then the issues will remain. So the idea is to continue to campaign against this menace, continue to hammer on it, continue to air it out, continue to say it, continue to build momentum around it, mobilize people around it, and ensure that it's becoming something that everybody knows about, something that people are beginning to take critical look at and ensure that policyholders begin to prioritize issues like this, and they begin to make investment and then commit resources around it to end the menace. So we should continue to talk about it. We should continue to mobilize around it. We should continue to discuss these issues. Yeah.
Indeed, Henry. And to a large extent, this economic system is obviously skewed heavily against women. Why do you think that is?
Well, it boils down eventually to our social norms and our cultural barriers within our system, and we are, and sometimes to a great extent also religious issues as well. So, but if we keep focusing on those barriers, we will not make headway. We actually need to continue to educate people on these kinds of issues to ensure that if you check within our climate, for example, the rate of poverty within some subnational region, like some states, is as high as 80%. And then these are the core issues that leads to poverty and people not having opportunity out there and all of that. So, but if we are able to invest more in social spending, for example, invest more in education, and then invest more also in agriculture, and at least enable women to have access to land and be able to do production, then we can actually say that, yes, we are taking concrete steps towards ending the menace. Yeah. So basically, we must begin to empower our women, begin to empower our girls as well, begin to empower our young people, and also empower those who are very vulnerable, particularly at the subnational level. And education is one key area where we can actually invest more to ensure that these kinds of anomalies are corrected.
Indeed, Henry, it's interesting you talked about empowerment and education, and of course, this has been going on for a long time, but it's one thing to make pronouncement, it's another to actually practicalize it. So how proactive is government in addressing this issue? We can make use of Nigeria, for example. Has it been, very committed, or there's still room for improvement, as it were?
You agree with me that there's still room for improvement, huge improvement. We have not exactly made commitments, as globally recommended. Our budget, for example, the education budget is still as low as, say, 3%. The current budget, if you check, the investment in health is still at 5%. Agriculture is still as less than 2%. These are not commitment at all in the right sense of it. Government must make deliberate effort to commit adequate funding to these critical sectors if we are really serious in ending poverty. And even within those percentages, we actually need to look into those percentages and see what are the critical areas where this kind of spending should go into? Should it go into infrastructure? Should it go into overhead? Should it go into salaries? Should it go into investments such that young people are able to access this educational system? And also, women are able to access input in terms of farm input and all of that. And then there are medical facilities to aid community people as well to be able to stay healthy and then live their full life. Because it's one thing, like you mentioned, to actually make pronouncements. It's another thing to implement it, to take it to the grassroots. Our government have continued to talk about how much investment they have put into this sector, but it's all revolved around the budget eventually. Look at the budget. The percentages there are quite very low. It doesn't show that we are committed to ending or committed to actually bringing people out of poverty.
All right, Henry, good perspective from you. Henry Ushie of Oxfam, I'd like to thank you very much for your thoughts on that. And we will bring in Susan Agada to also lend more light to this issue. We'll be right back after this break. Stay with us. You're welcome back. Still talking about gender equality, or inequality as it were, and of course the Oxfam report which we did earlier. I'm also joined by Gender Coordinator, Oxfam International, Susan Agada. Susan, it's good to have you with us. Good morning. So Oxfam is suggesting higher taxes on the wealthy and spending on child and health care. Is our budget reflective of this? We can use Nigeria, for example.
This budget definitely isn't reflecting, and that is why development partners like Oxfam try to wage in to try to close that gap. But there's so much development partners can do. We keep advocating to the government and gatekeepers to see how they can bridge this gap. And that's why Nigeria, amongst other developing countries in Africa, remain to be developing countries, because the government has not laid a lot of emphasis on the area of healthcare and education, just like you have just mentioned.
Indeed, Susan. Now, the world's 2,153 billionaires have more wealth than 4.6 billion people in the world. What does that tell you? And this is even commonplace in industrialized countries, so it's not restricted to a particular part of the globe. So what do you make of that development?
Yes, what that simply means is that the inequality gap keeps widening. It is not getting any better. And as much as development partners keep trying to advocate and pass the message out there, it just shows that the government of the day in each of these countries are not pulling their weights on closing that gap. Recent studies and research, just like you mentioned, keep showing that instead of that gap closing up, it's widening as the year goes by. So it just tells us that we really, really need to do more as citizens, as the government of the day, to see how we can close that inequality gap and wedge the gap between the rich and the poor. Because as it grows wider, it only shows that, you know, a disaster is looming to happen. So.
Indeed, you know, it's a very clear and present danger, as it were. You keep mentioning the word closing the gap, but how is Oxfam, despite the report that came out, you know, is engaging, you know, stakeholders in ensuring that this is actually achieved, if at least brought down to a barest minimum?
Okay, so for Oxfam, as we all know, it's a global confederation of 20 countries working together to match out inequality and world poverty. In our own little way as an organization working in Nigeria, we have been engaging with stakeholders, with the government, and the people at the community level to see how much we can close this gap. Because we have realized in recent studies and in most of the studies we've done in recent times, that the major crux of this inequality issue stems from the gender inequality. There's an issue of imbalance when it comes to unpaid or underpaid care work. In a recent survey we had, a recent research, it shows that 79% of the agricultural workforce in Nigeria are mainly women, leaving 21% of that workforce as men. At the same time, this 21% of men are, from the research we carried out, shows that this 21% of men are 5 times more likely to own land than the women. And it just shows an issue of inequality, underpaid, underpaid work, and lack of access. And those are some of the major issues that will not let this gap close up. As far as we don't preach gender equality, equal opportunities, and the ability for the roles of men and women to be defined on an equality basis, then we continue to experience some of these challenges that face us in the face every day.
Indeed, Susan. Earlier on, when I spoke with Henry, we talked about gender inequality and, of course, cultural norms. So where does enlightenment come in at this rate? You also talked about education, as it were. What do you make of it?
Yes, enlightenment is the very key thing when it comes to social behavioral change, and that is one of the major pillars Oxfam uses to reach its targets group. Education is also responsible, a lack of education is also responsible, majorly responsible for some of the challenges we see today in our society. And so it is very key, and that's why we as an organization, we also advocate for educating the girl child, and access quality education to our children, because it stems from the beginning. And once this challenge is tackled from the onset, then the issue of inequality begins to be solved. Because as far as I'm concerned as a development worker, when those basics have not been tackled in terms of awareness creation, education, understanding what these issues are, and giving awareness to, boys and girls, men and women, then we cannot begin to tackle the issues of inequality that we see existing in our society today.
Interesting perspective. Susan Agada of Oxfam, I'd like to thank you very much for your thoughts on those issues. Good to have you.